Today's story is titled Scarlet Stairs by HrafnaRunar. The link to the story is in the description below. Please enjoy. My father and I were sitting on the porch in the late summer. The Florida heat lingered in the air as the sky burned pink and orange. The woods across the property buzzed with insects, and the humidity made the windows sweat with moisture. Dad sat in his chair with a half-burned cigarette at the corner of his mouth. It was our daily ritual. He worked a lot, always had my entire life, so these porch talks were something I cherished. We could spend hours out there, discussing anything: history, politics, religion, values, women problems. He always comes off harsh, but he's the kind of man you can talk to about anything. As the sun sank behind the trees and the air finally began to cool, the conversation drifted, as it often did, to old places we'd lived. There were many of them. He moved a lot when I was young. Military, work, a second marriage. I don't remember most of the places clearly, only fragments. A hallway, a backyard, the way a room felt at night. When I mentioned the house in Pocatello, he went quiet in a way that immediately told me I'd said something wrong. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took a drag from his cigarette.
"I didn't think you remembered that place,"
he said. I told him I did. Not all of it, but enough. I remembered the stairs. I didn't mean anything by that. It was just the first image that came to mind, but his reaction was immediate. He leaned back in his chair and looked out into the yard instead of me. For a long moment, he didn't say anything.
"You were very young,"
he said finally.
4, maybe 5.
I told him I knew. That didn't seem to reassure him. He asked what else I remembered, and I found myself hesitating, suddenly unsure how much I was supposed to say. There are things you grow up learning not to bring up, even if no one tells you directly. That house was one of them. I remember how white it was, I said. And the stairs, the red ones. I always thought that was weird. I laughed, trying to cut the tension. That was when he told me it bothered him that I still remembered it at all. He said memory from that early usually doesn't last until something anchors it. He didn't explain what he meant by that. Instead, he said there was something he'd never told me about the day we left. Something he'd kept hidden from me for 20 years. Something he thought I was too young to carry with me. He asked if I really wanted to hear it. That was the first time it occurred to me that whatever had happened in that house hadn't ended when we left. We moved into the house in Pocatello when I was still young enough to be excited by the idea of having a real front door. Before that, we'd lived in apartments and manufactured homes, places that felt temporary. This house didn't. It was old and solid, with wide steps and thick walls that smelled faintly of wood and dust. I remember thinking it felt like a place people stayed. What I remember most clearly is the way it looked when we first arrived. The exterior was painted a bright, almost blinding white, layered thick over old wooden paneling. The stairs leading up to the front door were painted red. Too red, even to a child's eye. They stood out sharply against the white of the house and the fresh-cut grass, rising to a large black door that always seemed to soak in the daylight. Something about those stairs made me uneasy, though I didn't have language for that feeling at the time. I remember pausing on them more than once, looking down at my feet before climbing the rest of the way up. But I was excited too. I had my own room for the first time, and the town itself felt friendly and familiar in a way other places hadn't. Inside, the house was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Sound didn't travel the same way it had in our previous places. Footsteps seemed softer, voices more distant. The floors were dark, worn wood, and light came through the windows in narrow bands that shifted slowly across the walls as the day went on. My room was down a hallway that always felt longer at night. It wasn't large, but it was mine. I spent most of my time there on the floor, surrounded by toys, drawing or building things I never finished. From my window, I could see the yard and the garden my father and his wife worked on in the evenings. During the day, it felt safe. At night, the house felt different. I don't remember anything specific happening at first. No noise I could point to. No shapes in the dark. But I remember being aware of the space around me in a way I hadn't before. Doors seemed farther away. Corners felt deeper. I always asked my father to keep my door open, even though I couldn't have explained why. Downstairs, the basement was finished but rarely used. It stayed cool year-round and smelled faintly of concrete and old air. I didn't spend much time down there, but I remember the light switch at the top of the stairs and the way the light looked when it was on. Dull and yellow, seeping up through the gaps in the dark floorboards above. At the time, it didn't mean anything to me. It was just the way the house was. The first things that happened weren't frightening. They were irritating. My father worked long hours then, as he does now. When he came home, he was usually tired, already halfway thinking about the next day. Most nights he stayed up later than the rest of us, sitting at the kitchen table or in the living room with paperwork spread out in front of him, a cup of coffee going cold beside his elbow, and a cigarette always between his fingers. The house would be quiet by the time he finally decided to go to bed. That was when he started noticing the light. The basement was finished, but it wasn't a place we used often. It was too cool, too dim, and it never quite felt like part of the rest of the house. The light switch was at the top of the stairs, just inside the doorway. When the light was on, it bled up through the gaps in the dark floorboards above, faint yellow lines stretching across the wood like something trying to surface. The first time he saw it, he assumed he'd forgotten to turn it off. He went downstairs, flipped the switch, and stood there for a moment, listening. The basement was quiet. No hum from the light. No sound of anyone moving. Satisfied, he came back upstairs and went to bed. The next night, it was on again. He noticed it while locking up the house, the faint glow visible through the floor near the kitchen. He frowned, cursed under his breath, and went back down the stairs. Off again. Another moment of standing still, another quick glance around, then back upstairs. By the third or fourth time, it had started to irritate him. He asked his wife if she'd been down there late at night, if she'd left the light on by accident. She said no. He asked me once casually if I'd been playing in the basement. I hadn't. I only ever went down there with one of them. It kept happening anyway. Some nights it would be off. Other nights it would be on again. Always late. Always after the house had gone quiet. He began checking it automatically before bed, annoyed as he headed for the stairs. Sometimes he'd turn it off and find it on once he reached the main floor. It turned into a small, pointless battle with the house, one that never escalated enough to demand real attention, but never stopped either. I didn't know about any of this at the time, or if I did, it didn't register. Looking back, I realized it was the first thing that made my father uneasy. Not afraid. Not yet. Just aware. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't pray over it or call anyone about it. He did what he always did when something didn't make sense. He ignored it and kept working. The light wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't costing him anything but a few extra steps down the stairs. But it was persistent. By the time anything truly frightening happened, the house already felt different. Quieter somehow. The wooden floors felt darker and heavier, as if it had learned our routines and was testing how much we would overlook. It happened one ordinary afternoon. The sun was high, pouring through my bedroom window. I remembered the breeze flowing through the curtains. I was playing with a friend from school. He had spread our craftstone animal toys across the floor. The large rug our ocean for little sharks and whales, arranging them in patterns and making up grand stories. The air was warm and still, the kind of quiet that makes a house feel like home. My father's wife came in to tell us that my friend's mother was outside, waiting to take him home. We said our goodbyes, and I heard them leave, their voices drifting across the yard. I began to gather my toys, putting them into the box I always kept in my closet. I paused to look out the window. My father and stepmother were talking in the garden. They seemed calm, unhurried. I placed the box in the closet and began to rummage through another for more toys. Then it happened. I felt it before I even understood it. 2 large hands pressed hard against my upper back. The shove sent me stumbling into the closet, the door slamming shut behind me. Darkness. Complete. I couldn't see a thing. I couldn't even think about what had pushed me. All I felt was a sudden, overwhelming dread and a strange, insistent compulsion not to turn around. I screamed, of course. I cried. I banged against the closet walls, hoping someone would hear me. I remember the air smelled faintly of wood polish and dust. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. It was one of the first times I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. My father came running. He must have heard my screams from outside. I could hear him pounding on the closet doors, calling my name. He tried to pull the door open. They didn't budge at first. Then, he began smashing his heel into them. The doors splintered and he ripped me out. Nothing else happened. Just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The closet was empty. I was shaking. My father held me tight. I remember the quiet afterward, the kind that fills a room when everyone has stopped breathing at the same time. After that, my feelings on the house completely changed. Pressure began to fill the house. It wasn't that anything visible had changed. The walls were the same white. The sun still fell through the windows in the same narrow bands, but the air was heavier, colder somehow, and the shadows seemed longer. Hallways felt more confining. My room, once a place of comfort, felt hollow, and the window looking over the yard no longer reassured me. None of us wanted to be alone there anymore. I stopped going into the hallways without company. My father spent more time in the workshop or outside, avoiding the house when he could. He wouldn't talk about what had happened. I could tell he didn't want to acknowledge it. That was his way of keeping it from becoming real. My stepmother took a different approach. She spent hours in the kitchen with books open, reading about ways to cleanse and protect the home. She tried sage, incense, and prayers. Sometimes she moved through the rooms muttering softly, fumbling with bundles of dried herbs. My father allowed it, though reluctantly, and mostly stayed away while she worked. After that, the house seemed to settle somewhat. It wasn't the same as before, but the oppressive weight lifted just enough that daily life could continue. Still, I noticed changes in small ways. Doors that used to swing easily now creaked even when touched lightly. Floors groaned under no weight. Shadows in corners shifted as if avoiding the light. At night, the basement smelled stronger, sharper, colder. The house seemed aware of our movements and of our reluctance to be alone. I tried to ignore it, focusing on toys, games, friends, and school. But there was a tension always in the background, a quiet waiting. And I realized, even as a child, that it wasn't going away entirely. Months later, I left to visit my mother. When I returned, the feelings I once had, the excitement, pride, and comfort, were gone. The Scarlet Stairs, once vivid and playful in my memory, now seemed like a sprawling tongue of some great monster. something I had to climb carefully, as if each step required a conscious effort. The hall by my room was darker, longer, and I could feel the house itself pressing around me. By then, I understood one thing. Whatever had happened in that closet had changed the house, and in some ways, it had changed us too. It was late, quiet, the kind of night where all outside sounds diminish into eerie stillness. I had been sleeping in my room, the door open as usual, when my father woke to get a glass of water. On his way back, he said, he felt the need to check on me. When he opened the door, he froze. According to him, I was standing on my bed. My eyes had rolled back, showing only the whites. My arms were extended in a stiff, strange formation. Something like an arrow, my father would later say. I was moving my lips, forming words, but nothing came out that anyone could understand. He grabbed me immediately. I remember being too frightened to even register the comfort of his hands. He held me tight, commanding, praying to Christ, speaking aloud in a way that made him sound both furious and terrified. His voice boomed through the house and woke my stepmother. I don't remember the words he said. I only remember the sensation. The pressure of his hands, the sound of his voice filling the room. Then, it was over. Just like the closet, I was normal again. The bed, the blankets, the room, everything was as it had been. After that night, nothing else happened at that level of intensity. We moved soon after, living with my grandparents for a while until things settled elsewhere. Even years later, he said he thought I was making the sign of the cross with my body, but it had looked more like an arrow, deliberate and odd. For him, it was terrifying. For me, it was confusing. And for the both of us, it left a mark on the memory of that house that never faded. Years later, we sat together on that porch in the late summer evening, the Florida heat softening as it faded into evening. We talked about many things, as we always did. Life, work, small worries, but inevitably, the house in Pocatello came up again. He told me he was surprised I remembered it at all.
"I didn't think any of that would stick,"
he said.
"You were so young."
I told him I remembered the Scarlet Stairs, the hallways, the basement light. He nodded, listening, but his eyes seemed distant, like he was weighing whether he should say more. Then he paused, long enough for me to realize that something important was coming. He told me that the day we finally moved, he and my aunt were outside, packing the last boxes into the moving truck. As they worked, he said, both of them looked up. The sky was dark with clouds, and the stairs looked like an open wound. Both of them saw it, a black silhouette watching from my bedroom window. He hadn't told me because he decided I was too young to know such things, too innocent to carry it. He had assumed I would forget it with the years. I didn't respond at first. The image, 20 years later, pressed itself into my mind with the same sudden sharpness it must have been in my father's eyes that day. I could see it, standing there against the dark glass of the window, impossibly still, unseen eyes boring holes into me. We didn't speak about it again, never to be brought up, the story dying with the last ember of his cigarette. But the memory lingered, as all the others did. The stairs, the closet, the basement light. A quiet reminder that some things, no matter how long ago, don't end when you leave them behind.